He went through my phone and caught me bragging to my friends about having a new boy toy with a huge one. My name is Ashley, and my husband's name is Ree. I'm 34 years old, and Ree is 32. We've been married for about 10 years now, and we have an 8-year-old boy who I'll call Gray for the sake of privacy. Ray and I first met way back in freshman year of college. I'll admit the first thing that attracted me was the financial freedom he could offer. Let me explain a bit. Ree was quite popular on campus back then because his sister was a bit of a celebrity and their family was pretty wealthy. So when I met Ree and saw that he obviously liked me, I followed up on it swiftly. I wanted financial freedom. School had never really been my thing, and I theorized that if I could just end up with Ree, I would never have to work a day in my life. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I didn't like Ree. He just wasn't what I would initially be attracted to. He was handsome, yes, and kind, but he was too nice. I like my boys a little more bad, and I know people on here will say that's toxic and stupid, but whatever. Everyone is allowed to have preferences. In the beginning, Ray was sweet and nice. He showered me with gifts, paid for everything, and I moved in with him. I was enjoying life immensely, and I think that was when I realized that Ray was too much of a big fish to let go. I had to end up with him. We graduated, and though Ree wasn't big on marriage, after a few subtle pushes from me and even my family, he finally gave in and proposed. 2 years later, we got married, and of course, it was huge. I've always wanted a big wedding, and Ree's parents sponsored the wedding, so I went all out. Ray's parents were nice to me, and I genuinely thought they liked me until they insisted I sign a prenup. I signed, of course, because if I had resisted, that would have seemed suspicious, and Ray might even have called off the wedding. They then gave us a house as a wedding gift, but the house was only in Ray's name. I think that's when I realized that Ray's parents liked me, but they didn't trust me. Our marriage was good at first. Ree was attentive and was always the one to make the first move. He was very good to me. I was a stay-at-home mom, as I had told Ree even before we had our son that I didn't want to ever work, and Ree was fine with that. Despite me being a stay-at-home mom, Ray still helped me around the house and even suggested getting a babysitter for Gray so I could still take breaks, but I turned down the offer. Ray worked in his parents' company, and that meant he could dictate his own hours. Ray was a very good parent, and our son worshipped him to the extent that I became a bit jealous of their bond because Gray and I didn't have that kind of connection. So, where did things start going wrong? I think it was when I started getting bored. Before Ree and I got married, I'll admit I had been cheating on him relentlessly. Don't judge me, please. Everyone makes mistakes, and though I never came clean to him, I stopped and focused on us when we got married. But yeah, I got bored quickly. Ree was always the perfect husband and father. He was caring, thoughtful, and generous. He made sure I never had to lift a finger if I didn't want to, but I began to feel trapped in the boringness of domestic life. Everything just felt so predictable and routine-like. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that this was what I had wanted: stability, security, a family, but the more I tried to convince myself, the more restless I became. Ray's constant goodness began to grate on me. I missed the rush I used to get from sneaking around and sleeping with other people. I know how that sounds, but I guess some people are just wired differently. Ray would come home early from work to spend time with Gray and me, and while I appreciated it, I also felt stifled. He was always there, always present, always loving, and instead of feeling grateful, I felt suffocated. Gray adored his father, and watching their bond grow only made me more resentful. I felt like an outsider in my own family. I felt like Ray was just too much. I started to resent him. His constant attention and care felt overbearing rather than comforting. I couldn't even talk with anyone about how I felt because all my mom and friends advised me to do was get a job, so I wouldn't be that bored. But I didn't want to get a job. I married Ray for financial security, so I wouldn't have to work a day in my life again. Working would just defeat that purpose. In fact, every time someone suggested I find a job, I felt a surge of anger. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. To them, my life looked perfect: a loving husband, a beautiful home, a wonderful child. They didn't see the suffocation, the boringness, and the feeling of being trapped. I started finding excuses to get out of the house more often, telling Ray I needed some me time. He was always understanding, encouraging me to take time for myself. But instead of finding solace in hobbies or outings, I found myself growing more and more discontent. I would just drive around aimlessly, just hoping to fill a void that nothing seemed to fill. Most times, I would even go shopping and make expensive purchases I didn't discuss with Ray. I told myself that Ray wouldn't mind and that I deserved it. I think about things now, and I feel so bad for Ray. He was understanding. He was always there. Even though Gray had grown a bit distant, Ray still didn't push for me to work. He suggested it once. I said no, and that was it. Ray respected my wishes and never pressured me into doing anything I didn't want to do. He was the perfect husband in many ways, always considerate and supportive. During one of these outings, I ran into Kyle, a younger guy I met at a cafe I frequented. He had been the one to approach me, and we chatted briefly. It was pretty clear that Kyle was everything Ray wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, and a bit of a bad boy. Our conversation started to spark in me that I hadn't felt in a long time, and I'm going to be honest with you all. That day, we didn't exchange numbers, so I started frequenting the cafe just hoping that I would see him again. After a few more meetings at the cafe, we finally exchanged numbers so we could keep in touch. Kyle said he was going through a brutal breakup and really needed a friend. I wanted to be that friend, even though deep down I knew I had a bit of a crush. I told myself I was just being a good person, offering support to someone in need. Our conversation started off innocently enough. We talked about life and shared our frustrations. Kyle was in his early 20s, and so I had a lot more experience than him regarding life. He would tell me about his dreams, his struggles, and how he felt lost after his breakup. Kyle's stories about his ex-girlfriend painted him as a victim of a heartless woman who had wrecked him and left him broke. I couldn't help but feel sympathetic. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done genuinely in a long time. He made me feel seen and appreciated, and it was intoxicating. Kyle's youth drew me in, as weird as that sounds. His admiration and the way he looked at me made me feel special, like I was the center of his world. I started looking forward to our conversations. I was always checking my phone constantly to see if he had messaged me. Our chats had started as just casual exchanges, but then it became more frequent and intimate. Weeks went by, and I became obsessed with talking to Kyle. I loved the attention and excitement that he had brought into my life. I changed my phone's password, started being more secretive, and lost interest in Ree. Ree noticed the changes in me, but he didn't say much. He trusted me, and I used that trust to my advantage. I would sneak away to text Kyle and was always careful to delete our conversations. I became more distant at home, withdrawing from Ree emotionally and physically. I didn't want him to touch me or hold me because it felt like a betrayal to Kyle. Even though I was the one betraying Ree, I began making excuses to spend time away from home. I'd tell Ree I needed to run errands or meet up with friends, all while I was really meeting Kyle. Kyle and I were hanging out constantly. It had started with casual coffee dates and just walks in the park, but soon we were spending almost every free moment together. I dressed up for him, paying extra attention to my appearance in ways I hadn't for years. I wanted to look good for Kyle, to feel desired and attractive. As our relationship deepened, the boundaries between us kind of crashed. We were full-on flirting and knew we wanted each other. One afternoon, we decided to meet at a quiet spot by the lake. It was a secluded area where we could talk freely without the fear of being seen. We had just been talking, but then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. We moved to the back seat of Kyle's car, and before I knew it, we had crossed the line. We had sex, and it was amazing. After we finished, we sat in silence, and the reality of what we had done was now sinking in. I knew there was no going back now. I had betrayed Ree in the worst way possible. But instead of feeling remorse, I felt happy. From that day on, our relationship became more than just emotional. That was when we started having a physical affair. Ray, who was still oblivious to my affair, continued to be the attentive and loving husband he had always been. He noticed my change in behavior but just attributed it to stress or boredom. He tried to engage me in conversations and plan little surprises to cheer me up, but nothing he did could compare to the excitement I felt with Kyle. Well, as the affair progressed, I became even smarter at hiding it. I would delete messages and calls, come up with elaborate excuses for my absences, and make sure to cover my tracks meticulously. The more I got away with it, the bolder I became. I started to see Ray not as my husband, but as an obstacle to my happiness with Kyle. I also started spending money on Kyle, paying his bills, his rent, 100 here, 1,000 there. It began with small things like treating him to dinner or buying him little gifts, but as our relationship grew, so did Kyle's needs. He was younger and struggling financially, and I wanted to help him. It made me feel needed, important, and more alive than I had felt in years. Of course, there were moments when the guilt would creep in. I would see the love and trust in Ray's eyes, and, for a brief moment, I would feel a pang of remorse. But I always pushed those feelings aside because I had stupidly convinced myself that I deserved to be happy and that my needs were more important. The more time I spent with Kyle, the more I resented Ray. I compared him to Kyle constantly, always finding faults even where there were none. I blamed Ray for my dissatisfaction, telling myself that if he had been more exciting or attentive, I wouldn't have needed to seek comfort elsewhere. My marriage continued to deteriorate. I stopped engaging with Ray altogether. Our conversations reduced to basic pleasantries. The emotional distance between us widened, and I could feel Ray's hurt and confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth despite the guilt I felt. I couldn't give up Kyle, and I kept pushing those thoughts aside because I was just too scared to face them. Looking back, I can see how selfish and destructive my actions were. I was so consumed by my own desires that I failed to see the damage I was causing. My marriage was falling apart, and I was the one holding the match. Despite everything, Ray didn't deserve this. He was a good man, a great father, and he had given me everything I had ever wanted. Well, my behavior at home continued to change. I became more distant, more irritable, and less engaged with Ray and even Gray. Looking back, I wish I had handled things differently. I should have been honest with Ray from the start, talked to him about how I was feeling, and try to work through our issues together, but I didn't. And now I'm left to deal with the fallout of my actions. I was not only emotionally attached to Kyle, but also physically too. The sex was just way better. Kyle had a bigger tool, I'm sure you know what I mean, and he was also more energetic in bed, maybe because he was still in his 20s. Being with him felt like an escape from the boringness of my life with Ray. Ray tried to talk to me, sensing that something was off, but of course, I was too deep into my affair to even care. When he would bring up his concerns, I brushed him off, telling him we were fine. I assured him that he couldn't expect everything to remain the same after 10 years of marriage. I made it seem like our drifting apart was a natural thing, something that just happened with time. I also told him that my main focus right now was our son, Ray. Being the understanding husband he was, he tried to believe me. He wanted to believe that our marriage was just going through a rough patch and that things would eventually get better. I was so unfair to Ray. He deserved better than the half-hearted affection I gave him, but at the time, I was too blinded by my own desires to see it. I was living in the moment, chasing the highs of my affair with Kyle, and ignoring the damage I was doing to my marriage. Well, things finally blew up in my face. I guess I got too bold. What did I expect? Thinking Ray would never find out. I thought I had everything under control, but I guess not. Ray finally discovered what I had been doing, and he kicked me out. Of course, he had to do it like a coward instead of confronting me and talking about things. He threw my stuff out while our son was in school and I was out with Kyle. I had gone out with Kyle as usual because Gray was at school and Ray was at work, or so I thought. Only to come back from my outing to find all my things on the porch and Ray's assistant waiting for me outside. Ray's assistant had been with Ree for a while, but I had never liked him. I was shocked, of course, and I immediately started screaming, asking what was going on. The assistant, to his credit, didn't know much and only said that Ree had ordered him to wait until I returned and to collect the car keys from me. I thought he was bluffing, so I called Ray, who picked up and told me he knew about my affair. He told me to hand over the keys to his assistant and to take my things and leave. At first, I refused, but then Ray threatened to call the police and report the car as missing, since the car was in his name. That woke me up, and I gave the assistant the car keys. At this point, I was still a little baffled. I hadn't seen this coming. I wanted to beg Ray, but I didn't want to seem like a beggar in his assistant's eyes, so I waited until he had left before calling Ree again to beg. Ree refused to even listen to me. He told me to check my phone, where he had sent me screenshots of my chat with my friend. He said he would send them to everyone we knew if I didn't leave peacefully. I couldn't let those screenshots get out. I had been bragging to my friend about how I had a new boy toy, Kyle, and how he had a bigger tool. Everyone would turn against me if they saw those screenshots. So I immediately apologized to Ray, called a taxi, and headed to my parents' house. It was humiliating. I had always prided myself on being in control, on manipulating situations to my advantage, but here I was, thrown out of my own home, exposed and powerless. My parents were shocked when I showed up with all my belongings. They didn't know the full story, and I wasn't about to tell them. I spun a tale about Ree being unreasonable and needing some time apart. They let me stay, but I could tell they were skeptical. In the days that followed, I tried to reach out to Ree multiple times. I called, texted, even emailed, but he had blocked me on everything. He had cut me out completely. Gray did reach out to me, though. My parents started pressing me for more information about why I had left Ray. They knew me well enough to sense that something was off. I have been deflecting, but I know I can't keep up the charade forever. Eventually, the truth would come out, and I would have to face the full extent of my actions. Hence why I'm on here now. I'm in a bind. What do? I really need advice. In fact, I'll appreciate anyone I get update. My first post got way more traction than I expected, so here's an update. I got a lot of direct messages asking for more detail, and the hate comments have been quite funny to read. I'm thick-skinned, so they don't get to me. So keep them coming, or don't, it's up to you. My husband ed me, despite saying he wouldn't post the screenshots. He did. He posted them on his Facebook, and when I say everyone saw them, I mean everyone. My family, his family, our friends. My parents were furious and disappointed. They were angry that I didn't trust them enough to tell them the truth, and that they had to find out from a Facebook post. Our relationship is kind of broken now. There's really hurt that I couldn't confide in them, and they're angry that I would ruin such a beautiful marriage. I've tried apologizing and picking up more chores around the house, but I don't know how else to fix it. Mutual friends have also cut me off. They've told me that Ree is determined to move on and wants nothing to do with me. They said he would be serving me divorce papers soon. They've chosen Ray's side and made it clear that they think I was wrong for cheating and ruining my marriage. Kyle, on the other hand, was no help when I told him what had happened. He seemed more concerned about his own situation than mine. Fine, he didn't offer any support, financial or emotional. It became clear that our fling was just that, a fling. He wasn't going to be my safety net. He started giving me one-word answers and even went days without replying. I didn't want to believe he was withdrawing from me, so I kept making excuses for him. I finally went to see him unannounced and met the girlfriend he claimed he had broken up with. They had never broken up. The girlfriend was shocked to see me and even more shocked when I told her everything about me and Kyle. Kyle wasn't home, but he messaged me later, insulting me and telling me he had only used me for money and sex. He said I was stupid to think we had anything more. He said his girlfriend would eventually forgive him, but he didn't want me to ever contact him again. I finally got in touch with Ree. He unblocked me on phone, and we talked for a while. He told me he wouldn't forgive me and wanted a divorce. He said he would be fighting for custody of our son, Gray. That was a wake-up call. I told Ree I couldn't let him have custody, but Ree told me I had given up custody rights the moment I cheated. He advised me to check the state laws if I didn't believe him. I refused to back down. I will be arming myself with a lawyer. I don't have much money, but my parents have said they will pay for the lawyer, so that's that. I messed up big time. I traded a stable, loving relationship for a series of cheap thrills, and now I'm paying the price. Ree had been nothing but good to me, and I betrayed him in the worst way possible. So that's it for now. I'll update again if something worth updating happens. Thanks for reading. I guess update, it's been a while. I know some of you might have thought the hate comments drove me away, and to be honest, they did play a part in why I dropped off for a bit. Reading all the judgments, being called a narcissist, a gold digger, wasn't easy. Here's what's been going on in my life. First and foremost, my husband and I are divorced. I know that's probably the update most of you were waiting for, to hear that I've lost everything. Well, you were right. I didn't get custody of my son, Gray. My lawyer advised me to give it up because, in my state, cheating often means losing custody automatically. It hurts, but I know Gray is better off with his dad. He's 8 now and understands things in his own way. We didn't tell him about the cheating. We just said Mommy would have a different place to live now. The divorce settlement was brutal. My husband invoked the prenup, which had a cheating clause that meant I barely got anything. I lost most of what I thought I had secured during our marriage. Losing custody and assets weren't the only losses. I lost my friends too. Our mutual friends sided with Ray, and I've been on my own since. My relationship with my parents has improved slightly, but they're still disappointed and angry. They're charging me rent now. I don't have a job, so they consider it a debt I owe them until I can pay it off. Once I find a job hunting has been a nightmare. I've been at it for almost a year now without any luck. The job market is tough, and my lack of work experience isn't helping. I regret not taking my career seriously when I had the chance. Maybe I should start freelancing or something, but it's daunting. I've gained weight, almost 70 lb, and I'm struggling to lose it. Everything feels like a mess, and I can't help but hate how my choices have led me here. So that's where I'm at. I'm sure many of you are thinking good riddance, and honestly, I get it.